Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Very happy to be here. First of all, I heard the questions when I arrived. It talked about Hong Kong and so forth. So let me just say the following. I was born and raised in Hong Kong, studied in the United States, and then came back to Hong Kong and worked in Hong Kong ever since. So if I look at the history of our bank, HSBC, we were born in 1865. Now it's been like about 154 years. And we were born in Hong Kong, and then about a month later, we were born in Shanghai. Again, so what we have witnessed since that time is that we have seen a lot of wars. Invasion by the 8 nations in China, First World War, Second World War, Opium War, Reunification War, Cultural Revolution, you name it, we've been through it. And also, in my 40 years of banking history, I've been through 10 crises, financial or otherwise, and now here we are. We're still the number one bank in Hong Kong and the number one foreign bank in China. What I'm trying to say is this is not a marketing pitch. What I'm trying to say to you is that these things will pass. There will be a solution. And after the solution, we will rebuild, because Hong Kong has gone through 10 crises, and every crisis we have been able to rebuild. And I've been a part of that. So I hope that, yes, we are not very happy nowadays, but I think that there will be a solution. There will be a solution somewhere along the line. Somewhere something has to give. So please just have confidence. The other thing I want to say to you is that before I start my speech, everything that's going on right now in the world is kind of chaotic. We have the U.S.-China tension, we have the Brexit, we have the situation in the Middle East, we have the North Korea situation, we have the South China Sea situation, with the Taiwan situation, now we have a Hong Kong situation. Everything seems very, very chaotic. So what I've done is that, the first thing I did is travel around the region to see what the customers are thinking. And I went to China, a manufacturer that has about 700,000 employees, And so I asked the manager, I said, what are you going to do with all these trade tension and so forth? I said, what are the main markets? And he said, well, U.S., Europe, all over the world and so forth. And so I said, what are you going to do? Are you going to kind of like, you want to move back to your home country, and which is Taiwan? Or you want to move to some place in Asia Pacific, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, and so forth. So these are the low labor cost country. He said, I can't. He said, I will, if I move back to Taiwan, I cannot hire 700,000 people. There are no 700,000 people for me to hire, first of all. And secondly, if I move to some of these Asian countries, again, I have the same problem, but they don't have the same infrastructure that I'm having now in China. So I said, what are you going to do? So he said, first of all, the markets that I supply to, China, Europe, anywhere but United States, if there is a trade war, then I will continue to have my operations in China. So if I have to supply to the U.S., then I'll move part of my operation someplace else in Asia Pacific, so that it can be labeled, the origin of label is not going to be China. So it's very interesting how people are dealing with these kind of situations. Now, some people that have a smaller operation went to places like Vietnam, and so I went to Vietnam and I talked to our CEOs and so forth, and then he said, well, Vietnam is already up to capacity. They don't have enough talent, they don't have enough electricity. They're trying to build, but it's up to capacity right now. And then I went to Indonesia. And then I met this client of mine, and he said, okay, this client is very rich. He has an island near Bali, okay. And so he said, the island has coal, as a coal mine. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to Vietnam, and I'm going to build power generation. I'm going to be in power generation. And so amidst of all of these changes, the tension and everything, the only premise that I can come to is that everybody is not going to wait there, is not going to sit there and wait to die. They're going to find ways out of all of this. And we're going to form new supply chains. We're going to form new customer base. It may not be globalization, it may be regionalization, but the concept of supplying, from one country to another is not going to change. It's still going to be there. You can call it anything you want, but the supply chain will be formed. So what I'm going to talk about today is about globalization and sustainability. Globalization, talk about where we are, how we got here, and also where we might go. And I want to talk about sustainability. Sustainability is not just environmental sustainability, but sustainability in the broadest sense that of creating social, financial, and governance systems that are durable and equitable. I also want to talk about the roles and responsibilities of corporations. So when we talk about globalization, 20 years ago, it seems like it's the greatest hope for the future. It has lifted millions out of poverty, particularly here in Asia, and gave people access, and gave people across the world access to affordable, high-quality products that would have once beyond their reach. But today, globalization is being blamed by many, especially politicians, about the growing social unrest, stagnant economies, and falling living standards. These are real problems, but is globalization the cause of it? Or it just happened to exist alongside with it? But if we look at what's happening in the last 20 years, the technology and also, to a certain extent, liquidity has a lot to do with everything that's happening now. But technology innovation, because of the accelerated change, technology has changed the global economy beyond recognition, in good ways and in bad. And production has fundamentally changed the shape of the workforce, and disproportionately hitting the lower or the middle income class, and it has reconfigured the balance between capital and labor. Let me give you some example. I was with a customer again, and he has one of his business is producing eggs. So went to his chicken farm. The chicken farm is very modern, right? It's very sanitized, and he was introducing me how the eggs comes about, and I look at the whole operation. So this particular factory alone produces about 2.4 million eggs per day, and it has about 1 million chicken. And so I was asking him, I said, how many people do you need to make sure that you can tend to the operations? And he said, it was previously about 200, a little bit over 200, now it's 40. Okay. And so he brought me to the operation, to the floor, and then I see it is very clean, everything inside, sanitized, no people allowed to go in. And I see all these robots walking around up and down the aisle, There's nobody in there. It's like about 40 people, nobody in there, just the robots. And the robots continue to test the wind speed, they continue to test the temperature inside, and continue to test the temperature of the chicken. So if there's a change in temperature in the chicken, then the chicken is sick. But the question is, what happened to the 160 people that were there, who were there? What are they going to do? So to a certain extent, we have to understand the advance of technology, the impact on the lower and the middle and the lower and the middle income class. And if we look at China today, China, on one hand, they have urbanization program, about 10 million people a year urbanizing. On the other hand, they have, coming out from university, about 8 million students. So China has to produce 18 million jobs every year. But on one hand, you have 10 million people who are not kind of like up to the speed with the advance of technology, the 4Gs, the 5Gs, they're looking into the 6Gs, they're looking into robots and so forth. But on the other hand, you have the students who are going to be up for this. So how are they going to manage? I think these are very critical questions that people have to ask, because no matter what you do, people have to live. They have to feed their family, they have to eat, their children have to go to school. So these are some of the challenges that, being produced by technology and so forth. So it's something that we all have to face. I was hearing this morning about, whether technology is too fast, too slow, and whatever the case may be. I can tell you, technology will always be faster than the behavior of human beings. I had my master's degree in computer science, in artificial intelligence, and also relational database. And the theory of artificial intelligence hasn't changed that much. It's all the hardware, the chips, and the cloud computing and the distribution processing and so forth. The power of that has changed, and it generates the artificial intelligence. So the way I look at all of this is that if I look at back in the middle of 1990s, the introduction of internet. At that point in time, it didn't catch on. And then, in banking, we were thinking about, no more branches, everything is going to be digitized. But it didn't happen. We have branches, we have phone banking, we have everything else. But then nowadays, it's different. And the reason is that if you wind back the clock from 1990s, about 10, 15 years back, the kids were not born with iPhones, they were not born with laptops. Today, the kids, when they come out, they're waving their hands with laptops, iPhones, and everything else. And then it's sort of so they can catch on very quickly. So the savviness of these kids, continue to propel the advance of technology. So this is something that's going to happen, and, it's going to happen to all of us. So the one way is that I think the institutions, the governments, and so forth has to closely manage the balance between those who have the technologies and those who don't. So the second point I want to make is about liquidity. The gap of the discrepancy between the rich and the poor today, it's to a certain extent, is produced because of liquidity. And not too many people talk about it because it's not a topic that a lot of people understand. Politicians definitely don't. I hope there are no politicians here. So if we look back in 2008 after the Lehman crisis, the situation was that the U.S. pumped about over $4.2 trillion into the market. And then it was followed by the European debt crisis, and the European Central Bank also pumped money into the market, about a couple of trillion. And then China, in that they had a program, there are two stimulus programs, each about 10 trillion RMB, which is like about 1.6 trillion US. They're 2 years in succession, and so they have about 3-point-somewhat trillion dollars of liquidity in the market. So you have all this liquidity in the market running around at zero interest rates. So everybody was thinking, the governments were thinking, well, I put this liquidity out, hoping the banks would lend to the SMEs. The banks are not stupid. They're not lending to the SMEs because the risk is high. And all this money going into the asset management and so forth, and what do they do in terms of looking for return? They go buy assets because interest rates is zero. And so you have the booming of the assets, but the real wages have not caught up. If I look in the situation of Hong Kong between 2008 till now, the property prices have risen by more than 300%, while real wages have risen by about 40 to 50%. So because of the ample liquidity, there's a generation that the people are buying the assets, the rising on the prices of the assets, and the discrepancy between the rich and the poor gets more acute. So this is something that nobody kind of talked about. And, as far as technology is concerned, technology is being looked upon as, being promoted as a solution to a lot of problems. But technology is also part of it. Yeah, as I said, quantitative easing, nobody really looked at it because nobody really understands it. So people blame on a number of things, and the politician latch on globalization. So globalization is a bad thing. And so this is something that I think that we need to understand why it is what it is today. And to a certain extent, can people say that is globalization dead? The answer is absolutely no. So I want to talk a little bit about inequality. The technology, globalization, and also the liquidity situation sort of created a situation where some people have felt that they are being dislocated. They're dislocated from the community, from the world or society in general. They're concerned about their jobs. They're concerned about a lot of things. So this kind, the frustration accumulates. And so what are they going to do with frustration? Then you can see it on the streets of Hong Kong. You can see it on Brexit. You can see it on trade tension in the U.S. There are a lot of countries talked about protectionism. So I think that it's something that we all kind of understand why it is what it is today. So globalization has transformed the lives of millions. Okay. But if you look at it in terms of inequality, it reduced inequality between nations. That's horizontal inequality. However, along with the tech and QE, it has increased inequality between citizens. That's vertical inequality. Now, part of the challenge that we face that globalization carried Ricardo's the comparative advantage theory to its logical conclusion. Whole countries have specialized, focusing on economic resources on a small number of industries. In Hong Kong, the financial markets. As the Cornell economists Nancy Chow and Ravi pointed out in a recent paper, 40 years ago, 90% of the world's poor lived in low-income countries. Today, 3/4 of the world's poor live in middle-income countries. And globalization, in combining with liquidity, fuel asset bubbles, and technology, has increased vertical inequality. So inequality is a very, very big challenge facing us today, and so is the environment that we'll talk about. So the impact of that equality is global, even if it takes different forms. It is playing a key role on the streets of Hong Kong, we talked about, and other countries. But is there a way to kind of like, I wouldn't say resolve it, but how can we kind of like dampen down the protectionism, the unilateralism that's going on right now? So I'm not a genius. I don't have a solution to these things. I'm just a banker looking at things and hoping that, some of the things are fair, transparent, and so forth. This is what educated people want. And so the way I would kind of like, one way to kind of help this is by opening up of markets. In this case, China. A lot of the criticism nowadays have been directed towards China. That China is not opening up its market, that China is not doing the right things for the world, China is not taking responsibilities of the world. I think one thing we need to understand, and that is China, when we say China, China's only opened up like about, 40 years ago. And they say 70 years, but only 40 years since 1976, after everybody institute, the university has been put back into action. So the mentality of Chinese, if you wind back the clock, they are not the mentality of the West. The mentality of the Cultural Revolution and all that, and during that time. And so we got to wait to a certain extent. We got to give China the time to mature. China now wants to champion the Belt and Road. They want to champion this the environmental, the corporate, the environmental initiative. And so China also needs to learn. But opening China is the first step. China has about 1.4 billion people, and also 300 million in the middle class, and 600 million, and by 2030 it will be 600 million. And if China opens up its economy, other countries will come and invest. I think that will help to even out the protectionism, help to put, dampen some of the frustration. So also going forward, as far as Asia Pacific is concerned, Asia Pacific needs to have a bigger say in the world, because by 2030, 2/3 of the world's middle class will be in Asia Pacific. And this dynamic is going to drive spending, consumption, and it drives trade and so forth. So, but then the thing is that right now, Asia Pacific is quite fragmented. It's not operating as a bloc. I'll give you an example. In 2008, after Lehman crisis and European debt crisis, the Financial Stability Board in the West came out with lots of regulation that increased capital requirement. This is a medicine for the West, right? Asia did not have a problem, but Asia adopted it. So what it does is slow down lending because of the increase in capital. So Asia needs to be able to get together and find out what they want. What does Asia want? And because of the growth of the economies in the not too distant future, one of my recommendation is to Asia to form a bloc and to find out exactly what's happening in Asia, what does Asia want, and so that they can work with the rest of the world. So the two recommendations that I've just mentioned, China opening up and forming a bloc, I think this will help. And I don't know, I'm no genius, I'm not a politician, I don't know how to work all of this, but I think China is opening up, and I hope that China open up in a fair and transparent way. Talking about sustainability. Sustainability is something that everybody understands, everybody wants, and we see all the statistics. I'm not going to go into these statistics about how much of the land is underwater, how many people are going to be out of their homes and so forth in the not too distant future. But what I will say is that we found that China is now learning from Europe in terms of the standards, and also when I went to Singapore and talked to the Singapore government, they're already thinking about 100 years ahead. They're thinking about building a dam so that when the water rises, it's not going to do a lot of damage. So they're thinking about all of this. But then again, Singapore is copying Europe in certain respects. China is copying Europe in certain respects. But again, there are no consistent way of looking at this across Asia. So this is one of the topics that has to be within this agenda of Asia's, getting together. It cannot be every country doing their own thing and so forth. There has to be some standards. I know that China is driving towards the Paris Accord, but China can be doing it. But then businesses shift to Vietnam. Vietnam is using coal power, and then other countries the same thing. So you're going to have different types of businesses and also initiatives going on. Some saving some helping with the sustainability, some don't. So, as far as sustainability is concerned, everybody needs to play a part of it. The regulations need to play a part of it, because as far as the bank's concerned, sometimes we cannot, although we write it in the covenant and so forth, it's very difficult for us to enforce it because there are no standards. So we need to establish a standard so the banks can also enforce it. And so as far as the bank is concerned, we can change our lending criteria as far as green is concerned. So this is something that we're all doing, and something that has to be done in a little bit more consistent way. So people are saying that when a country grow, okay, the damage is going to be on the environment. I don't believe that. I think the technology nowadays can do a lot to help with that. And then also with the supply chain, if we can have regulations on the supply chain in terms of green, and the banks enforce it, and also the government enforce it, I think it will go a long way. So What I want to end today is to say the following. Sustainability is not something that we can take lightly of. Everybody has to play a part. All countries have to play a part. And the bigger the countries, they are big, they have to take a lead. They have to form, a committee, a forum, whatever, in the bloc to discuss it. As far as the globalization is concerned, I think it's going to continue to exist in one form or the other. It just can be regionalization, it can be globalization, it can be whatever, depending on the country's agenda in terms of unilateralization, or they want all protectionism. If they want to open, that's fine. But I think that if more countries open their markets, I think this will even out in the longer term. And technology is going to be a major part of it. But everybody should really think about in terms of the equality that is being generated in the countries, in the cities, and be mindful of that, because that can bite pretty hard. Thank you.